Mira que ya viene la revolución, para que se asustan será pa' mejor. Es el pueblo entero el que ya está gritando, ¡viva la revolución!
Iranian nuclear weapons development.
They have turned the island into a communist hellhole.
The experiment in Venezuela has failed completely.
La bestialidad imperialista. Bestialidad que no tiene una frontera determinada ni pertenece a un país determinado. Bestias fueron las hordas hitleristas, como bestias son los norteamericanos hoy, como bestias son los paracaidistas belgas, como bestias fueron los imperialistas franceses en Argelia. Porque es la naturaleza del imperialismo la que bestializa a los hombres, la que la convierte en fieras sedientas de sangre que están dispuestas a degollar, a asesinar, a destruir hasta la última imagen de un revolucionario, de un partidario de un régimen que haya caído bajo su bota o que luche por su libertad. Y la estatua que recuerda a Lumumba, hoy destruida pero mañana reconstruida, nos recuerda también en la historia trágica de ese mártir de la revolución del mundo, que no se puede confiar en el imperialismo, pero ni tantito así, nada.
Dicen que la patria es un fusil y una bandera. Mi patria son mis hermanos que están labrando la tierra. Mi patria son mis hermanos que están labrando la tierra. Mientras aquí nos enseñan cómo se mata en la guerra. Ay, que yo no tiro, que no, ay, que yo no tiro, que no. Ay, que yo no tiro contra mis hermanos. Ay, que yo tiraba que sí, ay, que yo tiraba que sí, contra los que ahogan al pueblo en sus manos. Nos preparan a la lucha en contra de los obreros. Un rayo me parta a mí si ataco a mi compañero. La guerra que tanto temen no viene del extranjero. Son huelgas igual que aquellas que lograron los mineros. Ay, que yo no tiro, que no, ay, que yo no tiro, que no. Ay, que yo no tiro contra mis hermanos. Ay, que yo tiraba que sí, ay, que yo tiraba que sí, contra los que ahogan al pueblo en sus manos. Mi hermano se levanta, estando yo en el cuartel, tomo el fusil y la manta y me echo al monte con él. Oficiales, oficiales, tenéis mucha valentía, veremos si sois valientes cuando llegue nuestro día. Ay, que yo no tiro, que no, ay, que yo no tiro, que no. Ay, que yo no tiro contra mis hermanos. Ay, que yo tiraba que sí, ay, que yo tiraba que sí, contra los que ahogan a España en sus manos.
Long live the struggle against fascism, against imperialism, against the enemies of the working class, the proletarian class internationally. What's up, everybody? Welcome to episode 86, Unmasking Imperialism, exposing imperialist propaganda in mainstream media. Today, we have a very interesting and special discussion, very unique discussion that had to be had today. It had to be had because nobody else is talking about this from this perspective. Latinos for Russia and China, for the Russian Federation and the People's Republic of China, in defense of our sisters and brothers in China, resisting Western imperialism, and in defense of our sisters and brothers in Russia, in Donetsk, in Lugansk, in Donbass, resisting Ukrainian fascism and NATO imperialism, and why Latin America and the Caribbean stands with the new order, the new people's anti-imperialist world order of Russia and China. Today, we're going to expose Western propaganda slandering Russia and China. We're going to discuss our support for and solidarity with both of these nations from a global South, Latin American, and Caribbean perspective, exposing U.S. attempts to paint Russia and Chinese cooperation in the region as imperialist, including from a lot of dusty, tired, white Western leftists who honestly comment way too much on a lot. We're going to talk about Moscow and Beijing's support for anti-imperialist governments in Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, the troika of resistance, or the trinity of liberation, as I like to call it, and also talking about why our people in the region are embracing multipolarity and cooperation with Eurasia. And lastly, toward the end of the show, we're going to talk about this phenomenon known as American Patriotic Socialism from an anti-colonial, third world, global South perspective, why we consider ourselves patriotic socialists, but not American patriotic socialists, what the difference is between American patriotic socialism and national liberation. Very important distinction. And joining me today, two comrades, Pedro X and Victor Coronado. Comrades, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves? Let's start with you, compañero Pedro.
Que la que everybody. My name's Pedro X. And first of all, Ramiro, thank you for inviting me again to Unmasking Imperialism. It's always good to be here and discuss things with you. And thank you, Victor, for joining us too. I always love talking to you on air or off air, man. But regarding me, I'm just a Puerto Rican nationalist, follower of Pedro Albizu Campos and Malcolm X. And yeah, that's the main thing I can say about myself. Mostly, people can catch me on B-Level's podcast, Ewoks Unhinged. That's usually where I'm at. But yeah, that's it for me.
For sure. And a shout out to Comrade B-Level, Ewoks in the building. I picture him saying that with his loud voice. B-Level is a good dude.
Me too.
A really funny guy. Shout out to B-Level. Subscribe to Ewoks Unhinged. Really, really good comrade. Really principled and loves discussion. And also, compañero Victor Coronado. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Coronado, hailing from the city of Perth Amboy. I actually moved back to Perth Amboy, so I'm super excited about that. I'm back in my hometown. I'm with ANTICONQUISTA. You can check us out, anticonquista.com. Third worldist, brown nationalist, Marxist-Leninist, and just a longtime activist. I'm retired from a lot of activism, if you will, but I'm doing a lot of the stuff online now, where we're just trying to educate and inform folks. And so thank you for inviting me, Comrade Ramiro, and Pedro X. Likewise, always a pleasure to chop it up with you.
Yeah, most definitely. And what I like about Victor's commentary, especially on Ewoks Unhinged, he keeps it real, and he also does a great job at dissecting and demystifying some of the differences between what has been considered patriotic socialism and also has been considered ultra-leftism, because there's Can you guys hear me okay?
Now we can.
All right, perfect. Cool. Yeah, my fault. Probably my Wi-Fi is acting all ghetto. But what I was saying is that there's been this false dichotomy of like you either support Russia and China and you wave the American flag, or you oppose Russia and China and you're like an ultra leftist kind of anarchisty, angsty teen. And so I think, all three of us, none of us fall into that category. We support Russia and China. We are optimistic, constructive socialists. We support optimism and constructive socialism that's not just grounded in taking down the system, but actually building. And we see that in the global South. But at the same time, we don't identify with the United States of America. We see the US flag, even worse, if anything, than a swastika or a Nazi flag. We don't identify with this empire. We don't uphold the US as a nation. And so, that's a very important distinction to make. And especially, when we're talking about Russia and China, because a lot of imperialist propaganda, especially in recent months, has been directed at Russia and China, in particular after the February and March special operation in Donbass, liberating Donetsk and Lugansk from Ukrainian fascist government in Kiev and helping the oppressed peoples of Donbass against Ukrainian fascism. And overwhelmingly 90-95% of the propaganda media out there was, pray for Ukraine, stand with Ukraine, all this liberal nonsense. And it was refreshing to hear, people like Victor and people like Pedro and others who actually take a principled position, defend Russia and China at a time when it's not popular or trendy to do so, right? If you were to wave a Russian flag or have something in defense of Donbass or China, you'd probably get attacked in the street by these Ukrainian liberal types. So, I have a lot of respect for people who take the principled positions at the moment, in the heat of the moment. I remember in 2014 when all the nonsense was going on with Syria, and people were like, we need to bomb Syria. All the liberals and leftists, I remember, were putting out articles like, we need to take down Assad and his regime and all of this and that. And I remember at that time being in defense with Assad and the Ba'ath Party was very controversial. So I have a lot of respect for people who defend the unpopular revolutions and movements and governments, even if they're not socialist, even if they don't meet the ideological pure checklist of some of the dogmatists. So I really appreciate that. Before we start, maybe we can start with you, compañero Pedro. What has been your take? Why do you defend and support the People's Republic of China and the Russian Federation, with all its contradictions, with all its mistakes or whatever? Why do you speak out in defense of these two countries?
Well, it's really simple. These two countries have been allies to Latin America in their most recent years. Like, they're helping, for example, China's helping Argentina get out of a debt with the IMF by getting into the Belt and Road. Also, they've been helping Argentina develop. Also, well, not Argentina. They've also been helping Bolivia develop its lithium industry, so they can finally extract it. Russia has been giving Brazil vaccines. Like, in other words, they've really been helping us out and our people out, especially with countries that have been embargoed, like Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua. And in return, these countries have sworn allegiance, have decided to make closer ties with Russia and China. So that's my main reason. Now, I'm still new to this, so I don't know the full history yet, but whatever internal contradictions they may have with Putin or even Deng's policies, that's not for me to decide. In fact, it's not even any of my business to comment on it. That's for the Russian and the Chinese people to decide. And that's it. It's not that much of a hard equation for me.
Yeah, most definitely. And I think that's a great point to mention, is that it's really up to the people. That's the thing that really bothers me, is that there's this stereotype that Chinese people are just all brainwashed, obedient robots who follow any leader. And so you would think in a country with over 1 billion people, over 1.5 billion people, that if they didn't like their government, that they would overthrow it, right? But they're like, oh, it's just one guy who's locking all the doors and making sure that nobody gets out. It just logically doesn't even make sense. And same thing with Russia as well. The arrogance of people in the US and the first world in particular, of not understanding politics internationally and how different it is. What about you, compañero Victor? And I do have this article that you sent me as well that looks really interesting. So maybe talk a little bit about why you defend Russia and China against imperialism, and also maybe share some of this article.
going to echo a lot of what Pedro X says. I mean, we're pretty much in line with that, with that position. And so here's a piece: Russia and Latin America foster cooperation despite sanctions. And Ramiro, I sent you another one as well by our comrade over in Europe, Carlos Martinez. If you could pull that one up too. But again, the math on this is pretty simple. The reason why we support Russia and China is because they support us. They're our friends. I have this quote. I think Ausatron News was the one who put it up, but it was a quote. There's an image on Twitter that was floating around. It's from former Chilean ambassador to China, Jorge Hein. Here's a quote: "When U.S. cabinet members visit Latin America, all they do is talk about China. When Chinese cabinet members visit Latin America, all they do is talk about trade and investment." So it's a simple equation. I mean, given the history, and folks, I like to mention and reference certain things. So I always think about the person who's maybe tuning in for the first time. But you can look up the Monroe Doctrine. You could Google Latin American, U.S. relations or the U.S. history in Latin America. There's literally nothing that we can point to say that at any given point that the United States has been our friend. They have helped overthrow governments. They've used CIA operations to help overthrow governments. They fund, the United States empire funds quote unquote democracy initiatives, which are just imagine. So understand what that is. That's U.S. funded dollars that goes towards, usually organizations like NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, or USAID, who then start these democracy initiatives in Latin America, right? And typically in places like Cuba or Venezuela, or places where we don't have, right, where we want to overthrow a government, right? So imagine Cuba, right, which is a political enemy of the United States, funding democracy initiatives in the United States. That wouldn't, it would be considered an act of war, and it is an act of war. So this is the history of Latin America, as it relates to the United States. And then when we talk about the Russians and the Chinese, they come to Latin America. They don't point a gun at our head and say, if you don't do this, then we will do. They don't do that. They come in peace. They talk about trade. They talk about investment. They sell us arms. They sell us fertilizer. We talk about all types of economic development all over Latin America. So of course these folks are our friends. For folks who are confused about this, they shouldn't be, because it's simple math. It's literally simple math. And then, I have some other articles eventually, if we could post them up as well, which talk about all the concerns that the United States has as it relates to Russia and China. Well, of course, the United States has a history of overthrowing governments and supporting right-wing dictatorships, and again, the CIA, where they're talking about CIA operations or these more soft coups. While the Russians and the Chinese have zero history of this. I would challenge anyone at home, find me an article, find me one reputable source that you can find, to one reference that you can point to, where they've threatened us, or they've overthrown a government, or they've helped support a right wing. I mean, it doesn't happen. It has never happened. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty simple math.
Most definitely. Great point. And just reading off a bit of this article from Prensa Latina, Russia and Latin America foster cooperation despite sanctions. Exactly what Victor is talking about. This is a Russian diplomat. Quote, "We live in the real world, in the world of restrictions that the West tries to impose. What matters is that along with many Latin American countries, we find ways and opportunities to continue cooperation and establish mechanisms to promote ties that correspond to mutual interests." Speaking to Sputnik and asked about Moscow's prospects to expand ties after the imposition of Western anti-Russian measures, I'm not even going to pronounce his name because I'm probably going to butcher it, said that among other areas, these include projects in agriculture and the maintenance of food and energy security. The official stressed that the value that no Latin American country join the unilateral economic actions imposed by the U.S. and its allies. Very important line, by the way. No Latin American country joined the unilateral economic actions imposed by the U.S. Commenting about the issue, he emphasized that Russia sees Latin America as a friendly zone, while he recalled that historically, Russia did not have conflicts with the region. On the contrary, it has strengthened contacts through cultural, humanitarian, and economic exchanges established over the course of decades. So a really insightful article there. And I think that's a great point that Victor is saying. Like, historically, there has been no instance of quote unquote Russian aggression or Russian expansionism in Latin America and the Caribbean. In fact, during the 20th century, with the rise of socialist movements in Latin America and the Caribbean, a lot of communist parties in our region in Nuestra America were begging Moscow, begging the Soviet Union to send arms, to send weapons. And a lot of the accusations were that Moscow was funding the Sandinistas and the Cuban Revolution and the MIR in Chile. But in reality, a lot of those movements helped each other out. Very minimal aid from the Soviet Union, which is actually one of the critiques that a lot of Latin American communists had of the Soviet Union, was that it didn't offer enough support. But obviously, it's understandable too, right? At the height of the Cold War, if the Soviet Union were to even send one Kalashnikov to Nicaragua or Chile or whatever, the U.S. would interpret that as an act of war. So it's something that people have no idea. They get their cues from movies like Red Dawn, where you have the joint Soviet-Cuban invasion of the U.S. And it's just complete nonsense the way that people paint it. So I think that's really important to mention. But I do have a clip. This is a clip, kind of a white liberal perspective. It's called "Why Latin America is Choosing China Over the U.S." And it's interesting because the guy, he kind of makes some interesting points about why Latin America and the Caribbean is shifting over to trading more with China. And he kind of offers some liberal perspectives on, why that is. And it's interesting because a lot of the analysis that he gives is like, we need to have a friendlier approach, intersectional imperialism. We need to have more horizontal dialogue, but it's still promoting, U.S. imperialism. So I'm going to play this and we'll talk a little bit more about this.
The United States and China are fighting for influence in Latin America. In the past 2 decades, China has invested more than $160 billion in the region and now counts 20 Latin American nations as Belt and Road Initiative members. What's even more concerning for the US is that China didn't even consider Latin America and the Caribbean a priority target for China's overseas investments. Look at some recent comments from US senators. Bill Hagerty from Tennessee states, "This is our hemisphere that we're talking about. China is literally eating our lunch." Senator Edward Markey recently stated, "China has a plan. We don't have a plan." Can the US contain China and become the dominant player in the United States' own backyard? It's going to be a difficult task, so let's break it down in today's video. Today's video is proudly sponsored by NordPass, the best program to help you manage your internet passwords. Get exclusive access to NordPass' best offer at nordpass.com/Cyrus Jansen. Earlier this month, the United States hosted the Summit of Americas, a meeting for all the nations of North, Central, and South America to come together and discuss the most important issues facing the Western Hemisphere. But the United States had other plans, most notably the desire to counter Beijing's rising influence in the region. In 2021, China-Latin America trade exceeded $400 billion, compared to just $295 billion for the United States. But before this year's summit began, a massive controversy unfolded. The United States government decided to ban Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua from attending the summit. Why? Simply because the United States doesn't feel those countries share the same values in democracy. To be honest, this was an embarrassing and selfish decision the US government made, and it immediately backfired in their face. Remember, this is a summit of Americas. Every nation in the region deserves a seat at the table. And do you remember when the United States led a diplomatic boycott against the Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics? Well, this time Latin American countries used the same action against the United States. The most outspoken critic was Mexican President Obrador, who turned down the chance to meet Joe Biden in Los Angeles over the decision to ban these 3 countries from participating. Leaders from Honduras, Bolivia, El Salvador, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines all followed Mexico's lead. Instead of hosting a summit whose stated goal was to build a sustainable and resilient and equitable future, the only thing that this summit will be remembered for is the countries who weren't allowed to come, and also those countries who sent a clear message to the United States that they don't agree with playing political games at important world summits. I watched a lot of the speeches from that summit, and my favorite came from the Prime Minister of Barbados, who looked directly at Secretary of State Anthony Blinken and stated the following.
It's wrong that Cuba and Venezuela, Nicaragua are not here because, as you heard from Bahamas, that we need to speak with those with whom we disagree. And we don't only need to narrowcast. That's the part of the problem of the world. There's too much narrowcasting instead of broadcasting. There's too much talking at instead of talking with.
Let me highlight that last sentence once again. There's too much talking at instead of talking with. In my opinion, this is one of the most common errors the US government makes in foreign diplomacy. We always want the world to do things our way. We selfishly think that whatever is good for America must be good for the world. But every country deserves the right to choose their own form of government, and every country should have the freedom to choose with whom they do business with. In an earlier video entitled "The Real Reason America is Scared of China Global Expansion," I highlighted many Latin American countries are willing to trade with China as opposed to the United States because the US reputation in Latin America is one of overthrowing elected leaders, installing coup governments, and building US military bases on foreign soil. On the other hand, this article from the South China Morning Post shares China's vision. China is seemingly everywhere, investing in strategic technologies, embedding itself in 5G networks and other infrastructure, building military alliances, working political relationships, and joining projects early to gain influence. Here is an amazing statistic. Of the 31 countries in this region, 25 of them have partnered with China to build much-needed infrastructure projects for economic development.
So very interesting stuff there. And one line that I kind of found interesting, again, he's coming from a liberal perspective, but the argument is interesting because I think this is exactly the move that U.S. foreign policy is going to shift. He said there's too much talking at instead of talking with. And I feel like part of that involves trying to infiltrate the Latin American left and trying to create divisions between someone like Boris, who claims to be leftist, but it supports a lot of imperialist talking points and positions, and the anti-imperialist governments of Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba. So what are your guys' thoughts on this, starting with you, Pedro?
Well, I just got to say props to him for at least admitting that the Summit of the Americas was an absolute failure. That at least shows that the U.S. empire has learned its lesson from the last century, where they were trying to deny the Pan-Africanist movements that are rising under the leadership of guys like Ahmed Ben Bella, Sekou Touré, and Kwame Nkrumah. So at least they're learning from their mistakes and starting to acknowledge how things are. But putting that aside, it's just disgusting everything that's said. Literally, like the senators that he showed were saying our hemisphere, our backyard. Even the liberal guy who was admitting all these things was talking as if he was one of them, which kind of shows you that when it comes to like Democrats or right-wingers and progressives, when they look at our people, they all have the same view. They just see us as their pawns and as their subjects. So, I don't know what else to say. It's just the blatant lack of self-awareness is so incredible. And also the fact that they're mad that that all these Latin American countries are are looking for alliances with China so that they can further develop. I just find it weird. I'm like, really? So you're saying all of that, you're admitting to all the wrong deeds that that your country has committed in our continent, and then you're surprised that when they first get the first chance to get their sovereignty, you're mad that you're like acting like, oh, how could they go with China? Like how? I'm like, really? If the United States were in this, actually no, the United States were in the same boat when it was with the British Empire. They literally went for help from other European empires to get the British out. So I'm like, there's no self-awareness, none whatsoever, and it's appalling. That's all I gotta say.
Yeah, no, for sure. And turning to you, Victor, one thing that I wanted to ask you as well, what are your thoughts on people who claim that China is imperialist? Because that's something I hear a lot, all the time. And what I do want to share is an article that actually Victor sent me right now. It's Fox News, our favorite outlet, talking about, one second, hold on. Right here it says, let me just read it real quick and then I'll turn to Victor. U.S. should be concerned by Chinese influence in Latin America, military commander. The commander of the U.S. Southern Command has raised concerns that the U.S. is not matching China's grand strategy in Latin America. A quote, flying along the Panama Canal and looking at all the state-owned enterprises from the PRC, on each side of the Panama Canal, I worry about they look like civilian companies or state-owned enterprises that could be used for dual use. Hold on, my fault. It should say, the fuck? It's not. The imperialists are, they're dragging my thing. Hold on. Whoa. All right. Let me try this again. That's kind of, isn't that so eerie? They were like, next, like they were literally like, hold on, let me pull this shit up right now. Hold on, 1 second.
They
guys.
can't handle the truth, man. That's why they're trying to sabotage you.
Literally, they're like, hold on, let me remove that one, and hold on, 1 sec. All right, here you go. Let's try this again. So they could be quickly changed over to a military capability if they needed to do that, if they needed that too. So I look at this, the investment they make, I think we should be concerned. China's global strategy involves a broad investment in foreign markets, including the Middle East and Latin America. Even as Beijing struggles with domestic economic pressures and lagging recovery, it has maintained its foreign investment largely guided by its Belt and Road Initiative. Richardson, as the commander of Southcom, oversees operations in the Caribbean, South and Central America. She criticized what she calls, quote, South blindness, where the U.S. shows much greater concern as to what happens in the East and West, but not as much care for what happens in its own backyard. The Southcom area of responsibility, this is a very, very important region, she explained. I look at it like the 20-yard line. Wow, fuck this lady. If you want to talk about sports and do a sports analogy, we are on the 20-yard line to the homeland and to the United States, and our competitors know that. She highlighted such vital factors as the fact that 60% of the world's lithium supply sits in the region, along with the light, sweet, crude, rare earth metals, and 31% of the world's fresh water. Quote, there are adversaries that are taking advantage of this region every single day. So there you have it. Victor, your response to all that.
Yeah, so I often will say on air, you know, it's really important if you to read, you know, news from a right-wing perspective, from a liberal perspective, because a lot of times it's one of three things usually happens. So it's like they're either gonna lie, or they're gonna tell the truth and then they're gonna expose themselves, or there's going to be like a combination of the truth and the lie in there, and then they're going to try to distort things, right? So, but here, this is pretty, you know, I thought that was pretty straightforward. What she's saying. So, you know, 60% of the world's lithium. I mean, this is what we're talking about here. What we're talking about when the United States looks at Latin America, what are they looking at? They're looking at raw materials. They're looking at natural resources, and they're looking at cheap labor. They want to be able to exploit our people and our lands. That's how they view their backyard, right? That's the prism of the imperialists. How do we rape these people for everything they got? When we talk to the Chinese, when we talk to the Russians, there's a mutual respect there. It's on our terms. And what's interesting is that they're even willing to talk to, you know, and again, we could have a conversation about whether or not this is good or bad, but you know, China and Russia even does business with right-wing governments in Latin America. But what's important is that they're not spreading their ideological, you know, views, and you know, and they're not trying to take over our countries, right? They're just there to do business, and we respect that. We respect the shit out of that, because the alternative is the United States, which everything is by force. Everything has been done by force, right? And it's not just the United States, it's the former imperial powers as well. I mean, we could talk about Venezuela and what they've done with the gold reserves there and stuff like that. So it's, you know, this is why it's really, really important to really pay attention to what's going on, what's really being said. As far as, you know, before you mentioned some of the, like you call them ultra leftists, you know, I just think people sometimes have really shitty geopolitics. Like, you have to be able to, you know, if politics is a game of chess, you have to be able to know how to move the pieces, right, and how to play chess. And so again, it's just simple. It's simple math, people. Like, just pay attention, study what's going on, and you'll understand why people like us are in support of Russia and in support of China. You mentioned AMLO. You know, there was a few months ago, they asked AMLO. They said, you know, something along the lines of, you know, apparently there are a bunch of, you know, Russian, you know, Mexico apparently has, you know, X amount of Russian spies, intelligence agencies in your country. He didn't confirm or deny it. His response was hilarious. He said, "We're a sovereign nation." So I understood that immediately. Understood that, like, he basically said, "Yeah, we have Russian intelligence agencies. Go fuck yourself. You know, we could do whatever we want in our country. This is our country." You know, I think a few days later they went out and denied that there were Russian intelligence agencies agents in their country. But you know, it's no secret that the Russians, you know, have, you know, sold us arms. Between Russia and Cuba, they've helped places like, you know, Venezuela with, you know, in terms of buttressing their intelligence apparatus, and those are good things. That's what the United States does, right? The United States does that all the time. So why shouldn't we be allowed to defend ourselves and do things the way we want to do it? So yeah, again, it's just really important for folks to just pay attention. I'm glad that we're really having this discussion because again, there are a lot of folks out there who have really shitty politics.
Is it okay if I just add one more point? So regarding the article that Victor Coronado showed of the Fox News lady, I find it so funny how she was pretty much first of all, she's from Fox News. The Fox News people did not care about how Honduras, you know, in your country, Manuel Zelaya was overthrown, and how later during the Trump years there's a whole caravan from Honduras leaving the chaos that Obama left behind, who then got tear gassed. These people also did not care about how Puerto Rico got abandoned for 5 months without electricity during the hurricane. And Puerto Rico still hasn't recovered from the hurricane. Also, during the COVID pandemic, they literally were not giving us any vaccines whatsoever. The people who were giving them to us were Russia and China. So this is just so much apathy coming from those people. But now that they see us gaining some strength, gaining some power due to our alliances, now they suddenly care about Latin America. That's just hard to believe that her and all those people in that network.
Well, actually, point of clarification, this is she's actually the U.S. South Commander. So this is even more egregious. Like, I agree with everything you just said, Pedro X, but the person who's being quoted there, and we probably should have emphasized that, that is the sitting U.S. Southcom Commander.
Oh, that just makes the situation even worse.
Yeah. I follow them on Twitter. I suggest folks to follow them on Twitter as well. Kausa Chung News. They do a great job of also keeping tabs on them. So yeah, this is, you know, it's one thing to come from a propaganda outlet like you know, Fox News. This is the U.S. Southcom Commander.
Yeah, and Southcom is based in the land of the Gusanos, Miami, Florida, where a lot of right-wing exiles, far-right fascist terrorists who collaborated with fascist regimes in Latin America and the Caribbean are trained. A lot of mercenaries, a lot of tech stuff that's going on, especially with crypto, which, you know, maybe in another episode we can talk about that, crypto colonizers in Latin America. And there's so much going on with that. It's just crazy to see. And one of the things that comes to mind when I hear the way that these U.S. imperialists speak is one of the ways that in Shia Islam, for example, one of the ways that they call Satan or the devil is the great deceiver, the great liar, and somebody who puts a mirror on good and subverts it. And that's what I think of when I think of U.S. imperialist media lies, is like the great deceiver, somebody who is accusing somebody else, an innocent person, of doing all of the horrible things that they've done, right? The U.S. is accusing Russia and China of carving out influence, of backing terrorist groups, of murdering people, of controlling people through loans and debt and usury. And all of those things are what the U.S. has done for over 200 years in Latin America and the Caribbean. But they're using this mirror, they're deceiving the masses into making it seem like China and Russia are doing that. And it just bothers me how easily people fall for it. Like how people eat it up and they're like, oh, well, China, don't you know about China and Russia? They're doing this and that. And it's just, it's really frustrating, especially in particular. What bothers me the most is in particular within the left, and particular the first world white left, you have a lot of people who parrot these lines. So what I want to do is I want to play a clip. This is from a Marxist YouTuber named Marxist Paul. I know B-Level had a clip of this a few weeks ago. Check out that episode with Pedro X and Victor as well. It's really good. This is another clip from that same video that he did, claiming that Russia is an imperialist country. So we're going to play this and we'll talk a little bit more about that and why it's wrong.
Now, it should be acknowledged that the principal contradiction or main conflict in the world today is that between imperialism and the oppressed nations. And with this in mind, it's reasonable to critically support oppressed nations like Cuba, Vietnam, the DPRK, etc. on this basis against imperialism. But Russia, as demonstrated earlier, isn't an oppressed nation, but a capitalist imperialist power in its own right. Therefore, there's no basis for communists to support it along these lines, even critically. There's nothing anti-imperialist about supporting an imperialist power. And this leads us to another common misconception that's espoused by these campists. The myth that there are countries that are capitalist and are planning on remaining capitalist, but also somehow anti-imperialist. When we understand imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism, as Marxists do, it's clear that only an anti-capitalist country can be an anti-imperialist country. This would preferably be historically progressive, moving forward with the dictatorship of the proletariat and transitioning from the capitalist mode of production towards the industrial communist mode of production, or it could be historically regressive, seeking to revert to the feudal mode of production. A country that's not seeking to move forward to socialism, nor backwards to feudalism, but instead simply seeking to carve out a better position for itself within the global capitalist order, getting a bigger slice of that yummy capitalist pie, is not an anti-imperialist country in any way whatsoever. Even the primarily oppressed nations that aren't imperialist themselves but are remaining on the capitalist road can't be accurately described as anti-imperialist by anyone who adheres to the Marxist understanding of imperialism as the highest stage of capitalism. This is important because there are some who would describe Syria, Iran, Belarus, etc. as being supposedly anti-imperialist countries, despite the fact that each of these countries is simply seeking a better position for itself within the global capitalist system, rather than actually opposing imperialism by progressing towards socialism or indeed regressing to feudalism. As socialists, we don't stand with imperialist powers and their comprador lackeys. We stand with the working class and oppressed masses of the world, including those in both Russia and Ukraine. Our war is not that of one capitalist country against another, in which the international working class has nothing to gain and everything to lose, including life itself. Our war is the class war against the capitalists, the imperialists, and their comprador lackeys, whether from the West or from the East, towards the establishment of socialism internationally. Not country against country, but class against class.
Fucking whack-ass video parroting Wall Street. This guy's no idea what he's talking about. And just repeating the Wall Street imperialist South Command lies and propaganda. Before I do turn it to Pedro X and Victor to comment, because I know they're gonna fucking tear apart that video. What I do want to play is, he said as socialists we shouldn't support one country against another, it's class against class. I want to show you what actual socialists in Latin America and the Caribbean say about Russia. This is a clip. The first is Comandante Daniel Ortega from Nicaragua, the last living president who was actually a guerrilla fighter, a revolutionary, who actually fought in an armed struggle. My fault. Ophelia's alarm kill. Daniel Ortega, who actually, he was a fucking guerrilla fighter, bro. Like, he's an OG. He's the last living president of a Latin American country, of any country, who actually fought in armed struggle and who actually, saw everything. He was around in the 60s, and the 70s, the 80s. He's an OG, and he's talking about why he supports Russia against imperialism, and also, of course, Presidente Nicolás Maduro, an amazing president of Venezuela who doesn't get as much credit as he deserves, to be honest. I love Chavez. I'm Chavista 100%. But a lot of people hate on Maduro. They're like, oh, he's not charismatic enough. He's not this. Nah, man, Maduro is putting in work. He's lifting the Venezuelan economy threefold, fourfold with socialism, doing an amazing job. Also talks about why he supports Russia. So I'm going to play this. I'm going to just do some quick little translation, and then we'll talk about the left position on Russia and China. This decision taken by President Putin opens the possibility of that this situation will not have even worse consequences, because the imperialists are using Ukraine to provoke Russia. Ukraine is trying to find a way to enter into NATO. If they enter NATO, that's declaring war on Russia. That explains why Russia is doing all it can and doing what it is doing to defend itself. To defend itself. The step that was made today by President Putin of recognizing those republics, Donetsk and Lugansk, there's an area populated by Russians that entered a referendum, an election like that they did in Crimea. The people have voted for being annexed or joining Russia. They rejoined the situation before the collapse of the Soviet Union. President Putin denounced before the UN Security Council that they, NATO, intend to surround Russia, pointing all NATO weapons at Russia in order to attack and destroy it when the conditions are right. And what does the world expect from President Putin? That he should stand idly by and not act in defense of his people? This is why Venezuela announces its full support for President Vladimir Putin in the defense of the peace of Russia, in defense of the peace in that region, in the courageous defense of its people. The peace of Russia is the peace of the world, and we will defend the world's peace. We repudiate and reject all plans to surround Russia militarily and strategically. Russia has to be respected, as all the peoples of the world have to be respected. And lastly,
compañero decía, China, Rusia también es imperio. Yo diría, es un país desarrollado, tal vez potencia. ¿Qué hace imperio? Comparto con el compañero, imperio invade. El imperio instala bases militares y el imperio chantajea su desarrollo de un país. Como Estados Unidos, ¿por qué si Estados Unidos es imperio? Usa al Fondo Monetario Internacional y dice, si quieres crédito, alguna ayuda, primero tienes que privatizar tus recursos naturales. ¿Para qué? Para saquear. Yo no he visto una base militar de China ni de Rusia en toda América Latina. No hay. Sí, Rusia en algunos países está enfrentando las bases militares de Estados Unidos para sacarlo. Esa es la pelea a pedido de sus países. Esa es la profunda diferencia. ¿Qué es imperio? ¿Qué es una potencia? ¿Qué puede ser potencia? Mira, compañeros, si nosotros cumplimos con nuestra meta de industrializar el litio, porque tenemos un plan a 2028-2030, 40 fábricas de litio. Bolivia, con tema litio, va a ser una potencia mundial. Es una potencia en ese rubro. Esa no es esperanza, es una tarea. ¿No? Entonces una cosa es la potencia desarrollada, otra cosa es imperio. Imperios son los que invaden países. ¿No? Repito nuevamente, yo nunca he visto Rusia, de China, de algún país, India, y también es una potencia que tiene sus bases militares. La profunda diferencia con el Imperio norteamericano.
So there you have the actual OGs, Evo Morales, Nicolás Maduro, and Comandante Daniel Ortega, actual socialists who have actually organized and actually done real shit, setting the record straight, explaining why they support Russia and China. And also, you have contrast to that, this skinny nerd, idiot, loser in his mom's basement talking about, why they're not perfect enough to defend. So starting off with you, Pedro X, your analysis on all this and the contrast of these two positions.
Well, before I keep going, just a small correction. I wasn't in the episode with Victor Coronado when they responded to Marxist Paul. That was Victor Coronado and Dust James. Shout out to you, by the way.
Oh yeah, shout out to Dust. Yeah, he's a really good comment.
Another thing, just for the record, I actually like Marxist Paul because even though I don't agree with him on what he said, when it comes to Irish history, like the history of James Connolly, he's one of the biggest voices out there. So I think he does a really good job regarding that historical material and like putting it out there for people to understand. But again, putting that aside, again, he has no Paul and people who support his position who say that we should oppose both the East and the West. They have no skin in the game, literally. It's like as if they said they're helping countries in Latin America develop lithium factories. On top of that, they gave us vaccine. They gave us COVID vaccinations. In the case of Cuba, both Russia and China have forgiven Cuba's debts twice. Well, each one has each one has forgiven Cuba's debt that it had to those countries in order to strengthen relationships. Like Victor said, they've been helping them militarily, giving Venezuela weapons to fight against Colombian drug lords that are at Venezuela's borders. The list goes on and on and on. But and another thing, they also don't, like Victor also said, they don't impose their will on Latin America. In fact, they take that to a whole, like China, for example, and Russia, they take that to a whole new level. Even going as far as to not interfere in events like the coup in Bolivia. When the coup in Bolivia happened, Russia and China did not go in and arm Evo Morales' supporters against the coup. They let them resolve their own internal issues, and then they proceeded into making business with them. Now, mind you, I think it would have been cool if those countries did arm the Evo Morales, the mass supporters, because they're being genocided and massacred against. But that's just a personal opinion of mine, mind you. But anyway, but again, the point still stands. They simply try their best to mind their own business when it comes to dealing with us. And again, they also never enforce a foreign policy. They don't say, Latin America, you guys have to hate this other country. If you want to side with us, you guys have to openly oppose, even with the United States, you guys have to oppose the United States. They don't do that. They simply come in and say, hey, want to do business with us? We have some raw materials, some technology here. You have some raw materials. Let's switch and let's trade, and we'll get something out of this. Again, I know I've been repeating a lot of the things that have been said, but this is the issue. We don't have, we can't afford to. Oh, well, another thing I like that, we can't simply afford to be picky with our allies. If they're helping us out, then we got to do it. Because even with my homeland, Puerto Rico, if the whole continent were to rise and be economically self-sufficient, it would probably wake up the minds of a lot of the Puerto Ricans in the island as well as the diaspora, and want them to make them want to gravitate towards the continent, their brothers, which is filled with their brothers and sisters. So, yeah, that's it. He has no skin in the game, and I'll just leave it there. I'll pass it to you, Victor.
Very diplomatic by Pedro X. I appreciate that. And yeah, I don't want to be a dick. It just really bothers me, dude, when a lot of like white first world leftists try to speak for the global South. And I'm sure he has some, interesting content. But yeah, that video has like hundreds of thousands of views. So, Victor, your thoughts on all this? I think you're muted. Hold on.
Sorry about
There
that.
you go. Yeah, no worries.
What's interesting about that is a lot of white leftists will also have a lot of either support or curiosity about places like Bolivia and Cuba and Venezuela, Nicaragua, but then have these contradictory positions when it comes to, like, why would you be confused then after hearing what you just heard, right, from Evo and Comandante Ortega and Venezuelan President Maduro? Why would you then be confused as to why we would be supporting Russia? There should be no confusion. If you don't mind, and I did this on the white splaining, absolutely. If you don't mind, I did this on B Level's program, but I think it's worth doing again. I just want to go. Obviously, I'm not going to read the all of these articles. I just want to read some of the headlines of these articles, just to be able to contextualize some of this stuff. So here's an article. Here's the headline: Raúl Castro welcomes Russian President Vladimir Putin. Cuban President Raúl Castro welcomed his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, with whom he held official talks at the Palace of the Revolution in Havana. Before the official welcoming ceremony, Russian President placed a floral tribute in the monuments of the Soviet international soldier and the national hero of the island. And I believe he was received some sort of Putin was awarded the Order of José Martí, the highest distinction of the country, established in 1972. So here are the Cubans, welcoming Putin and honoring him, right? Here's another headline from Orinoco Tribune. The folks should check them out as well. They do wonderful work over there. Shout out to our good friends over at Orinoco Tribune. Venezuela and Russia reinforce military ties. Here's another article from Orinoco Tribune. Russia to export innovative financial technologies to Venezuela. Here's another article from Orinoco Tribune. U.S. general admits goal to target China and Russia worldwide. Again, so, we want to juxtapose what we're talking about with the perspective of the imperialists. Here's another one. Same thing, Orinoco Tribune. Venezuela installs Russian-made anti-aircraft guns to fight Colombian drug trafficking. Here's another one. This doesn't necessarily relate to Latin America, but again, to try to deconstruct this and break down this idea that Russia is imperialist. Russia and China veto U.S. resolution against North Korea at UN Security Council. So the U.S., is promoting a resolution at the UN Security Council. The imperialists, Russians and Chinese say, no, we're not doing that, right? Mexico declines to impose economic sanctions on Russia. Again, I wonder why. African Union head calls for lifting of sanctions on Russia. I could literally go on and on, probably for like the next 20 minutes. I got a ton of articles here, just as I prepared for this program. This idea that Russia is an imperialist power, where's the evidence for this? Because of what's happening right now, and again, this is not what the program is about, but that deserves, and you've talked about it, we've talked about it over ANTICONQUISTA, what's happened over there, in the Donbass region, and there's reasons why that's happening. So it's not just a black and white, like, oh, Putin is a madman who went over there to invade, and that's it, they're imperialists, right? They're invading another country and they're an imperialist power. It's much more complicated than that, and we've talked about that at other programs. Again, the issue of NATO, and folks have brought it up in the chat. So Russia has the right to defend themselves, as these Latin American leaders have stated. Again, I just need to understand how do we draw to these conclusions that Russia and China are imperialist powers? Where is the evidence for this? Latin Americans don't experience that. Africans and Africa are not experiencing that. So for us, we're very clear about these positions. The evidence is very clear, and so there should be no confusion as to whether or not Russia and China are imperialist powers, and they're simply not. There's no evidence for it.
Yeah, no, most definitely. Great articles, great selection of headlines, and even the groups in the global South that are against Russia and China and Putin and all that, a lot of them are backed by the U.S. Like here, we're looking at an image by this right-wing party in Venezuela, an opposition party called Primero Justicia, the group responsible for burning alive Afro-Venezuelans, for murdering hundreds of people, for sabotaging the Venezuelan economy, terrorists, right? These are right-wing fascist terrorists, racists. If you ever meet these right-wing escualidos, fucking disgusting people, just arrogant, racist people, especially the ones in Miami. So this is their political party, Primero Justicia. They have a sign that says Putin equals Maduro, and they have a half face of Putin and Maduro, and they have another sign that says Venezuela está con Ucrania. So this is what boggles my mind, is like a lot of the quote unquote leftists who support Venezuela, who maybe are pro socialists in Venezuela or Cuba or Nicaragua, but then they support Ukraine. They're like, oh, hands off Ukraine. Putin is a dictator. And in particular, and I know I mentioned this in a previous stream, I was particularly disappointed with Code Pink for putting out a lot of this imperialist propaganda from the left. It was like, feminists rise up against Putin. And it's like, I feel like there's this movement. Call me crazy, right? Call me a conspiracy theorist, call me nuts. But I feel like there's this active push within the Latin American left, and also the movements of solidarity with the Latin American left, to create a division between the causes that are more popular to defend, like defending Cuba and Venezuela, and also trying to oppose Russia and China, slowly inching their way. And going back to that first video of that liberal, the white liberal, where he's like, we can't just talk down at them, we have to talk with them. And that's why I feel like the liberals and the Democrats are the most important to keep our eyes on, to follow, because they know what the fuck they're doing. They know how to speak like us, mimic us, adopt our language. And that's why you have people like Boric, coming out, being heralded as the new Latin American left and the new pink tide. And so, I think that's really fascinating. So as we close this portion, of the conversation about Russia, China, and Latin America, maybe Pedro X, if you want to talk a little bit about that, like what your thoughts are on, how the trying to create divisions between Russia, China, and also Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua, and the Latin American popular movements.
Well, regarding there being a conspiracy, I don't really know enough, so I won't comment on it. But, it's a possibility, because let's not pretend this wouldn't be the first time the Western power structure has done something like that. But regarding like the liberals, like, of course, Victor and I are both consider ourselves students of Malcolm X. What did Malcolm X say about the white liberal? He said that the white liberal is a fox, because he knows how to trick us. Or the conservative is a wolf, always showing us his teeth, wanting to eat us, and being unapologetic about it. So that's what we see here. It's just, again, the same old trick. They're trying to appeal to us. They're trying to be our friend, only to stab us in the back when it's most convenient. And we can see it here. Right now, they're trying to separate us, our people, from getting a good alliance with Russia and China, so that they can finally break away from from the chains that the U.S. have put on them. And yeah, I'll just pass it to Victor.
Yeah, for sure. What about you, Victor? What do you think?
Yeah, no, it's a good point about the liberal and the fox, and I, Malcolm often said he preferred the wolf. Why? Because you know what you're dealing with. You could actually talk to that individual, and they know exactly where they stand. Like, there's not going to where the fox, the sly fox, is just going to lie to you and then stab you in the back, right? And so sometimes it's often easier to deal with the wolf, because you know exactly what you're getting. You can actually probably negotiate with the wolf, because you know exactly what the fuck you're getting when. So this, I often say that because I really hate passive aggressive racist shit and passive aggressive tactics. It's like, give me the aggressive person, because I know exactly where they stand. But as far as Code Pink and their ilk, whether this is intentionally being funded, and there's a motive from a different sort, I don't know myself. But what I would say is that this is why it's important for us to speak for ourselves, and to not allow certain individuals and certain parts of the so-called left to speak on our behalf. I've been saying this now for years. And I know I don't think I'm the one. I'm not talented or smart enough to do this, but at some point, Latinos in the United States really need to create their own organization, whether it's a political party or something like that in the diaspora, that will help unite the movements between the popular movements of Latin America and the revolutionary governments of Latin America, with hopefully a growing, real revolutionary Latino left in the United States. Because it's important for us to, again, I thank you, Ramiro, for having this discussion, for fostering this discussion, but I can't stand passive aggressive crap too. Yeah. So, it's important for us to speak for ourselves, right? And to continue to make those ties with our folks back home, and to be able to highlight these contradictions, but also highlight, the solidarity networks. There's Friends of Socialist China. Folks should check that out. There's Danny Haifang, there's Ramiro. There's a lot of folks who have really good politics, but we gotta own our own thing, our own movements, our own politics. We can't allow Code Pink and Democracy Now! and some of these other folks on the so-called left to speak for us, because they don't speak for us. And so that's why it's important to have these conversations.
Yeah, most definitely. We gotta stop allowing people who look like this to dominate.
Wow, that's cold, man.
Yeah, no,
these are like the type of like white liberal Karen types who run these like Latin America Solidarity and are like, oh yeah, I support Venezuela and Cuba, but then they're like, Russia bad, China bad. Dude, I've known them so well. I used to write for NACLA back in the day, if you guys are familiar with NACLA, North American Congress on America. Their whole office is like 10 of these, and they're just everywhere putting out imperialist propaganda. And that's why, exactly like Victor said, it's important for people to put out their own content, to create their own content, and also to have dialogue with Latin America and the Caribbean, go to Latin America and the Caribbean and speak with people. And one of the internal contradictions as Latinos from the diaspora that we have with Latin America and the Caribbean is also overcoming the colonization. I don't know if you guys have encountered this, but one thing, unfortunately, that happens too is that a lot of people, as one friend that I had put it one time, have like a cracker fetish within Latin America and the Caribbean, where they'll value like white leftists who come on the solidarity brigades and all that. And that's cool, right? Like, I'm all for, white solidarity with Latin America and the Caribbean. But a lot of times, like, the young black and brown kids from the hood who support Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua get left out or don't participate in these delegations because they don't have the money, they don't have the time. So a lot of times it's these kind of like white liberal boomers, retirees, who dominate those spaces and speak for and try to a lot of times water down the politics of our sisters and brothers in Latin America and the Caribbean. So I think that's another kind of internal contradiction that we have to overcome. And that's why it's important for our generation, our people, to actually go and meet with these revolutionary movements to build that space. And so I don't want to take too much of you guys' time, because I know it's been really awesome speaking with you guys. Just to kind of wrap up the conversation, one thing that I did want to talk about is this growing phenomena of what people describe as American patriotic socialism. I have a clip. This is a clip from Jackson Hinkle on American patriotism. I want to play this, and I want to get your guys' thoughts on what he says.
Jesus Christ, why are there so many comments about the American flag? I'm very much a patriot. For all of you that are just like, oh my God, burn it down, burn this country down. First of all, I just don't agree with it. But second of all, like, if you actually think that that is the type of strategy, that's the wording, that's the verbiage that you think is going to convince working class Americans to join on with your movement and to believe in a movement to fix this country, you got another thing coming. Socialism isn't about like tearing this country down or anything like that. Socialism is about using the mechanisms that we have in this country to build a 21st century socialism that is based on a history of American progressivism that will actually help this country. And help the working class people in this country, which is the overwhelming majority of this country. I believe in patriotic socialism because I want to help people. Socialism is about improving this country and improving the lives of Americans. And if you don't see that, again, I encourage you to maybe broaden your horizons, open your mind a little bit. I think everyone kind of goes through a phase where they're just like, fuck it all, burn it down. But one of my closest friends, he's an indigenous climate activist. His name is Chitescott Martinez. He was posed the question, you know, do you love America? If so, why? And he said, and I will always remember this because it stuck with me. He's like, I love America because of the, you know, capacity for change that we have here. Like, we have the potential to create incredible things here. And I still believe that. And I don't think it's a matter of whether or not you believe that or you don't believe that. It's a matter of looking at our history and looking at the vibrant working class proletariat history and movements that we have had in the United States and solidarity that we have had in the United States. And there's been many efforts amongst, you know, the ruling class and amongst even now progressives like Emma Vigeland, who will lie to you and tell you that there is no working class history in the United States. But if you've done your research, if you know your history, you know that that's not true. You know there is an incredible working class movement history in the United States. And we do have that capacity for change here. It's just a matter of whether or not we can make it happen. So I'm not cynical. Cynicism is the antithesis of progressivism and socialism. And that's why I have that flag up.
So very interesting. I just want to read a funny comment. Shout out to you, Comrade Emma. Are we doing we have one indigenous radical friend shtick now. And shtick is Yiddish for, like, you know, act, song and dance, or like, you know, your whatever it is you want to say. Comrade Pedro X, what are your thoughts on this as a Boricua, as somebody from a nation that has been colonized brutally by the U.S. for centuries?
Well, first of all, I know when a lot of these patriotic socialists like Jackson say, I'll talk about the progressive history that they like, they're usually referring to either the abolitionist movement, A, or B, the workers' movements that were led by CPUSA within like the 30s, around like the FDR era, or the era when the Puerto Rican Nationalist Party were also fighting under the leadership of the Honorable Don Pedro X Campos. So here's what I gotta say about that. If you really want to highlight that history, I wouldn't do it because A, when it came to the first example, the abolition of slavery, nothing really changed. Literally, after the Civil War came in, African people were thrown under the bus into Jim Crow and incarceration. As for the 30s, I also wouldn't really lionize that period neither, because once the white workers got their power, you know what they did to all the Black and Latino workers who fought at their side? They kicked them to the curb and never thought about them again. And whenever we tried to rise up, they would go ahead and oppose us in many cases. Like there's this, I was reading The History of the Young Lords by Joana Fernandez. There's this one time when these Puerto Ricans were leading a riot. They're having a riot in a part of New York. I forgot where it was. And they're fighting to have a civilian board that can investigate police brutality. Something really, really mild. And eventually they got it. The white population, due to them having a better relationship with the police, they came in and said, oh, that's whack. You spics don't need it. Yeah, I'm Puerto Rican, I can say that. But that's how they looked at us, you know? And we never got it. So that's like, again, that's not really good. That's like, those are two periods that shouldn't be glorified. As for the American flag, dude, like, our people always, like, for example, my people, we have contentions with that flag. That flag literally came into Guanica in 1898, and to this day, it keeps imposing itself on our people. That flag is the reason why Puerto Ricans have been kicked out and getting kicked out of our island, coming to the diaspora, where we're treated like second-class citizens and beat down, brutalized, incarcerated, humiliated, and all those types of horrible things that happen to us. So there's literally, exactly, and also the racist imagery that came along with the time. Again, like there's no, like, that's why, like, that's just me. Like, the reason why I'm explaining all these things is to briefly say there's no basis for us to
look up to that flag. And it's not just us Boricuas. We also have in the island of the diaspora, we also have the Chicanos who led their own struggle. We have the African people here. We're also going through similar experiences and who also have their own contentions with that flag. And I also like to add, before I pass it on to Victor, another point. And it is, you guys anybody here can challenge me on this. Look into the history of these three nations within the United States that I mentioned. You look into the Boricua nation, whenever we had to make an informed choice, we always chose nationalism. Look at the 1930s with Albizu Campos and the Young Lords as a big example. And then other groups that also had large mass support, which is, again, another blow against this American patriotism where we're all under the same flag. Look at African people. When they had to choose between the 30s, like CPUSA, Marcus Garvey, the majority of them went with Marcus Garvey. And after he got deported and the movement destroyed, then came Malcolm X. Who did they support? Did they support the integrationists or Malcolm? They at the end of his life, he was getting the support of all the African people here, as well as the people in his brothers and sisters in the continent. In fact, you couldn't go to the continent and say anything right to what Malcolm was saying because they would do you off the podium. As for the Chicanos, you can find this speech. You can find many resources, but and also Ramiro's video regarding national liberation. You see that the Chicanos literally were going for national independence. A big example is this meeting that was in UCLA, led by Reyes Lopez Tijerina and Rodolfo Corque Gonzalez and other leaders, who straight up declared their independence for Aztlán. And the majority of the people supported them, or they either supported them or on their way to supporting them. So these three historical examples are a blow to patriotism. I could go on, and we should definitely have another program for this. But yeah, these are the points, the historical facts that I just want to throw out there.
A lot of great points, Comrade Pedro. What about you, Victor? Your thoughts on, especially what Jackson was saying, that like, here's the thing, right? Like, before I turn it to you, Victor, like, if this was any other context, like if this was Latin America and the Caribbean, if he was like a Latino person saying this, I would definitely agree with him. Socialism isn't about tearing things down. 100% agree. Socialism is about improving your country and loving your country and wanting a better future for your working class. 100%. But what bothers me is that there's zero differentiation between the United States of America as an empire and a third world global South country like Cuba or Haiti. Like, where, they're totally, totally different. Like, you can't just copy and paste that same model and apply it to the US blindly without understanding that there's a very drastic contradiction there. So Victor, your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, and so I actually was going to go there with that. So you're teeing me up here. I really need, specifically white, but I mean other folks do this who are in that camp, but specifically white communists, leftists who talk about patriotic socialism and want to compare this country to Latin American countries. Like, please stop doing that. That's disrespectful. Like, stop fucking doing that, because it's not. Don't think for 1 second that they say things like, well, there's the same history of colonialism and slavery and whatever. But please stop fucking doing that, because this country, okay, when you start looking at the demographics of this country, when you talk about white supremacy in this country, and people will say, oh, well, you had that in Latin America. Again, stop doing this, because I heard one program, I'm not even going to mention his name, but he literally said recently that the anti-slavery movement could be traced to the United States. Now,
I know which program we're talking about, but I'm not going to say it either.
Yeah, so it doesn't make any sense, because the African slave trade route started in Latin. Africans spoke Spanish, French, Portuguese, way before they ever spoke English in this hemisphere. Okay, and so slavery ended in much earlier all over Latin America. Again, I'm not trying to play this, oppression Olympics game, but I'm just saying, like, if we're going to be historically accurate about this stuff, let's talk about. Don't say stuff like that, because it's just not true. All right, but folks need to really stop doing that. Like, stop comparing you know, the United States to countries in Latin America. Please fucking stop doing that. Our people have real culture, right? Our people have real customs and traditions. Here, this shit is like, there's a reason why by the way, I never even heard of patriotic socialism until recently. I've never, in any of my circles, I'm 42 years old. Anytime I've ever organized anywhere in the tri-state area, anywhere, I've never seen the American flag with the revolutionaries I've been around. I've never seen it. So I tell people that too. It's like, if you think this is a true and tried theory, right? Then go ahead and try to practice that shit in my hood. Come to, I'll go with you. Let's go to Newark. Let's go to Camden. Let's go to Trenton. Let's go to Amboy. Let's come to my hometown in Amboy. Bring that fucking American flag. Pardon me for sounding disrespectful, but bring your pasty white ass to all these hoods in Jersey. Let's go to Philadelphia. Let's go to Harlem, and bring a big ass American flag and talk about American patriotic socialism. And let's see how that works out for you. All right. So I always say, like, look, it may work in certain communities, and I think we could have that conversation. I've said it before. Look, I'm a brown nationalist. Pedro X have talked to you. You know, Pedro, you said recently you might start using that. And basically, my brown nationalism is formed after Malcolm X's black nationalism. It's patterned really after what he did with black nationalism. And I really encourage folks to read Malcolm X's speeches, especially his latter speeches, right? After he left the Nation of Islam, right? And all that means is that I'm not a brown supremacist. I'm not saying my people are better than your people. I'm not, we're not trying to replace white capitalism with brown nationalism. We're not trying to replace, a white supremacy with brown supremacy. But understand that, oppressed nations and oppressed people, we should have a certain deal of revolutionary nationalism, that we should build pride in our people. We need to learn more about our history and learn about our people's history and understand that our people are beautiful. Yes, Malcolm X, our people are beautiful. Our people have a rich history. We have music, we have dance, we have song, we have traditions, we have culture. And when we say we're brown nationalists, we're talking about that. We're talking about the revolutionary history of our people, right? All over Latin America and here in the United States. So we point towards, the Young Lords and the Black Panthers. We come from those traditions and those tendencies. And so for them to twist things around and say, well, patriotism, patriotic socialism or socialism is inherently patriotic, and then they want to point to all these other places where you have a more homogenous group and people who've been there for a long time with, traditions going back hundreds, several thousand. Like, that's not America, bro. Like, America, this whole thing is based off of land theft and slavery and then imperialism. So, let's have real intellectual conversations about this stuff. Stop calling us class reductionists. Stop saying that we're not developed politically. Oh, really? We're not politically developed? So in other words, you're just, again, this is the arrogance. You're smarter than us is what you're saying. You have a more politically developed, ideological position or whatever. Like, come on, man, you're being disrespectful, bro. Like, that's mad disrespectful. So I could go on and on about this shit, but it does drive me crazy. About this whole tearing things down too, just one other point. I work for a public utility company. I work for a natural gas company. If the foundation is rotted, you know what happens? The house is torn down. It's demolished. And then you build a beautiful house on top of a newly built foundation. So this idea that we can't tear things down, well, even in socialist countries or countries that are trying to build socialism in Latin America, what do you think they're doing? They're destroying things and building new things in place of that, in place of those things. So when whether it be Venezuela or Nicaragua or Cuba, when they took over, they had to destroy certain things and then build new things. All right. So there's not a contradiction there, but folks don't want to talk about this stuff because it makes them very uncomfortable. So it's just very easy to say, you're just not politically developed. You cute little brown communist. You're not politically developed. You have to be patriotic. That's the correct political position to have. Get the fuck out of here. You're disrespectful to me, bro. You're being disrespectful. I only want solidarity with people that want solidarity with me, specifically when it comes to white folks. Like I'm clear on that. And it is important for white folks to organize other white folks. That's your responsibility. That is your responsibility. And I will hold you accountable for that. And we will help you, but I'm not going to get on my knees to talk to racist, retrograde white workers and show them this little red communist book and say, look, this is what ties us all together, even though you want to kill me and you hate me.
Yeah. Wow. Powerful, man.
I'd also like
beautiful
to add
analysis.
to one thing that Victor said regarding the foundations. Guys, just compare figures like Thomas Jefferson, Washington, even other figures like Monroe. Compare them to Ramon Emeterio Betances, Simón Bolívar, José Martí, Gregorio Luperonov, who was Betances' friend from the Dominican Republic, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, all these, or even Vicente Guerrero, all these figures, and look at what they were aiming to. They either A, abolish slavery in the countries they were in, well, that they liberated, or B, like Betances, they wanted to liberate first indentured servants as well as the African slaves and Puerto Rico. And compare it to what these American figures that I mentioned. They kept slavery, wanted to exterminate indigenous people, and they said it on a number of occasions, and they went ahead and did it. And they also wanted to make people of color, like Black and Latino and indigenous people, second-class citizens. And if you look into the history, yeah, that's what they did, and that's what this society continues to do, because that's the foundation of it. So it's there's no equivalent. There's no way to there's no equivalence between Latino America and the United States. These are two totally different societies, totally different foundations that they're just not the same. And just another thing, when people try to say that there was settler colonialism, listen, I'm not going to say that the Spaniards and the Portuguese were perfect and an example or benevolent, because they weren't, But at the same time, they didn't come in and exterminate. Well, not on purpose. They didn't. In some regions, they didn't come in and try to exterminate. Have this big extermination plan for African and indigenous people. In most cases, they actually mix with them, and that's why we all have our unique features and our skin tone and stuff like that. Why you see in our families, some of us look a little different, which is cool, But that's what happened. You can't compare it to the United States. And this is what Pedro X Campos said, actually. He said when the Spaniards came in, they what happened in Latin America was a mestizaje, where the African and the indigenous and the Spaniard came in, and they mixed together, made a new race. While the Anglo-Saxon, when he came in, he exterminated the indigenous person, and he enslaved the African. And then at the time, this was during the 30s, he discriminated against the European immigrant. That's it, That's as clear as day when you take these facts into account.
Great, such a great point, Pedro. And I'm glad you mentioned that. Both of you guys had amazing points, especially about the history, the national question in Latin America and the Caribbean versus the U.S. And I think another point that really bothers me, the critique of anti-colonial, third world-oriented struggles from American patriotic socialists, is a complete discreditation, if that's even a word, or discrediting. There you go, discrediting the difference between exploitation and super exploitation. That as third worldists, we can explain that workers in Latin America and the Caribbean are objectively more exploited. And even Marx himself, I have Capital right here in front of me. One of the main parts of Capital that Marx dedicates a lot of time to is the theory of the rate of exploitation, where he actually provides a mathematical formula explaining how workers in the Western imperial core countries are less exploited than workers in India at the time. England, workers in England compared to workers in India, where you can't compare the surplus labor that is extracted from workers in the US, the UK, France, versus the surplus labor that is extracted from Haiti, Bangladesh, Brazil, where the rate is so much higher in the global South that it creates a super exploited majority. And I think that many of these people criticize third worldism or anti-colonial Marxist economics without even having properly read it or understand it. And even Ernesto Che Guevara himself, before passing away, was somebody who was leading the theoretical developments of this, or saying that the populations, the masses of Asia, Africa, and Latin America, and the exploited internal colonies of those regions within the U.S. will lead the revolutionary struggles of the 20th century. And that's exactly what we've seen. Where have the majority of socialist revolutions been? Asia, Africa, Latin America. Sure hasn't been, Belgium or France or Germany, and there's here exceptions here and there. But, we have to look at history as it unfolds objectively. We have to look at economics objectively. You can't compare a construction worker in the U.S. who makes $70,000, $80,000 a year to a sweatshop sneaker worker in Haiti who's making like 5 cents a day. There's no, and you can't just flatten the contradiction, as my comrade Onyesanu says. We're all workers. We're all, just basing it on the relation to the means of production. Yes, right. Marx does say that what defines a proletariat is your relation to the means of production. Do you receive a wage? Are you exploited? Yes, 100%. However, part of the dialectic is understanding that when you have a change in quantity, you have a change in quality. When you have a change in the quantity of exploitation, which Marx explains in Capital, Volume 1, which he provides a formula for, when that rate of exploitation gets to such a high degree that you're super exploited, that a worker in Bangladesh has nothing in common with a worker in the UK, right? And we have to acknowledge this. We have to realize this and actually study Marx, and not, just kind of do a gloss over of the working class and say we're all workers. We have to recognize who's most oppressed, and not even from an oppression Olympics point of view, but from having the respect, having the humility to be like, what, I can play a role in this movement. And this is why I always tell people, I'm not saying that white first world workers will not have a role to play in the socialist revolution. Everybody has a role to play, but that role is very different from the people in the global South who are living and dying by socialism, who are under the threat of violence every day, who are being murdered, slaughtered just for being in a union, who are literally dying of hunger. Those are the protagonists of the global socialist movement. And we in the imperial core have to have the humility to be like, we're going to play a secondary, tertiary role to support those people. And there's nothing wrong with that. We're not going to be at the forefront, with the megaphone and I think that's sort of like the arrogance of the first world, particularly the US. Like, people in the US are so accustomed to being at the center of everything that they can't imagine just being on the sidelines and helping out from the side. So, that's sort of like my little rant on that. I really appreciate you guys coming on. You guys were really a brilliant, amazing analysis, and I'd love to do a follow-up stream to this. I do have to head out because I have to meeting up with Ophelia for lunch, so I don't want to leave her hanging out there. But I love hanging with you guys, talking with you guys, and I'm glad this was such a great conversation. We support Russia and China. We support the People's Republic of China. We support the Russian Federation and Donbass, Donetsk, Lugansk against imperialism and fascism. We denounce the ultra leftists who claim that Russia and China is imperialist. And at the same time, we also are very critical of people who want to sort of play these mental gymnastics and save what this entity known as America, which is a corporate empire that is drenched in blood, that has the blood of our people on its hands. And so we promote, whether it's plurinationalism, whether it's, whatever it is, we reject this idea of, America and hanging on to this, because it is fundamentally antagonistic to us as brown nationalists, as people from the global South. So I really appreciate having you guys on, comrades Pedro X and Victor. I hope you guys have a great day. We're going to go out to some revolutionary music from compañero Pedro Hasél from España, who has a really amazing track about communism. Peace, comrades. I really appreciate having you on. Have a great weekend, everybody, and take care.
Comunista, por muchas cosas, sobre todo porque después de informarme, me di cuenta de que el socialismo es la única forma viable, posible, de un cambio a gran escala. No dejaremos de recordar los logros del socialismo, que fueron muchos, ayudando a muchos, Comunista cual bolchevique apuñalando a un zar, porque nadie debe tener derecho a explotar, porque el socialismo es un cambio de base, no un parche para una herida que tiene que curarse. Comunista como jornaleros ocupando tierras que colectivizan y sueñan con duquesas muertas, porque la tierra de ser de quien la trabaja se le quitará a los señoritos a las buenas o a las malas. Comunista como José Manuel Sevillano, muriendo en huelga de hambre sin ser un gusano, sin recibir dólares a cambio como esos mercenarios. Jódete Estado, no dejaremos que sea olvidado. Comunista como el Che tiroteado en la selva, cuando podría haber llevado una vida burguesa. Él fue la máxima expresión de comunismo. Quédate con su ideología o ejemplo, no con el mito. Comunista como Marx, que sin ser obrero luchó por quienes picaban piedra el día entero. El mérito de su trabajo es más que incalculable, y aún algunos pretenden desacreditarle, sin escatimar esfuerzos en desarrollar una teoría que beneficiara a la inmensa mayoría, asestando un golpe a la burguesía del que jamás se repondrá. Tarde o temprano aplastaremos su podrida moral. Comunista como Lenin, dedicando su vida entera al llanto de la burguesía, al triunfo de la clase obrera, agitando a las masas con discursos afilados, expandiendo la revolución de las ciudades a los campos, creando conciencia de clase. El odio al opresor es la base para construir un mundo mejor. Logró con argumentos organizar la rabia. Seamos la palabra que trama como su exilio en Finlandia. Libertad, igualdad, oportunidades. Acabaremos con el tanto tienes, tanto vales. Democracia son leyes que sirvan al pueblo. Por eso contra este atropello me rebelo. Comunista porque no se come de metafísica, y un cambio radical de base esto necesita. Antirracistas, antimachistas, evolución pedimos. Socialismo científico, marxismo, leninismo.